Well, good afternoon. Well, no, good morning, my friends. I usually say afternoon or evening, but I'm doing a morning video here before I get going for the day and had a few thoughts on the top of my mind about spelling. And it led me down this rabbit hole, I should say. I've the very term spelling, the etymology or where the word comes from. If you consider how the word spell is used in magic or occult, the idea of casting a spell. It's amazing how many people I've talked to who have never really made that association between spelling and spell. The idea that words hold a lot of power. And even those who, whether you believe in magic or the occult or any type of dark or light energy or power that people can work with, we still have a long history of people using enchantments, of mantras, of a variety of different tactics in order to either get in deep into their own minds or to try to heal others. Now, back when my channel was young, well, I should say a few years old, I was deeply into this kind of stuff. I mean, if you went back to some of my old videos from, 2012, I was deeply into these types of occult knowledge about where the words come from, how much power words hold, and I learned a lot during that time, and I got very much into it. And folks have asked me about it over the last couple of years. Oh, have you ever looked into this or this? And my answer is usually I just don't show much interest in it, and I want to explain why. It's because that world attracts so much negativity to it. There are certain people who are very much into hidden knowledge or secret knowledge. Occult just means hidden, really means obscured, and it's not an evil term. It doesn't mean that a person is looking for Satan worship. But you bring it up in the wrong crowd of people, and everybody just assumes that it's some kind of evil satanic thing. But it's not. It really is understanding the psyche, because the psyche is the microcosm to the macrocosm. So I want to talk about a few of these things, and I printed out a couple of things I wanted to read, but I'll just go ahead and just a couple of to define the word spell. The word spell is generally used for magical procedures which cause harm or force people to do something against their wills, unlike charms for healing or protection, etc. Now, I disagree with this because spells aren't exclusively considered negative, but in general terms, the belief underlying the use of spells is that the wish that they embody will be fulfilled regardless of its goodness or badness, so long as the formula has been correctly pronounced. Broadly speaking, then, spell and prayer, like magic and religion, to which they severally belong, can be distinguished by the nature of intended purpose. And I guess this would be somewhat like saying, good energy, bad energy, that kind of stuff. It's all perspective. It's all interpretation, good and evil. The deeper I got into these things, the more I realized that most of what we consider good and evil is subjective, up to the opinion of the individual, and there's very little that is objectively evil. And people have taken that to the extent of creating entirely evil kingdoms like hell, or places where, many cultures have these places where the negativity resides, because in our nature, in our hearts, we know that we want to be good people. And then we see evil in the world, and we ask, where could this possibly come from? And it's often the unintended consequence of a horrible youth. Many times the world's travesties and the worst people and their actions can be traced back to things that happened to them. So there's something to be said about the fact that it's not just the devil working through any random person or some sort of an evil force that overtakes people. And we've always considered people to be under a spell or under an enchantment or under possession, let's say demonic possession. And even up to recent times, and maybe in some cultures still, if people were to have a seizure, epilepsy was considered divine by many people, but it was also considered to be a possession by a evil spirit by many cultures. And the reason why it's considered to be divine is because when you're in that epileptic state, some people claim that they've seen it's the most amazing experience for them. And I'm not saying it's always a good thing, but people have these huge epiphanies during their epileptic seizures, where there have been stories of people changing religion every time they have a seizure because they have such this insight, profound insight into something. It would be like perhaps an intense psychedelic revelation, which I've had a few of myself. But I wanted to words. What got me all into this was just this one thing I started writing. I wasn't even going to read this, but it says, there are so many existential threats out there already that any threats to real democracy usually go unnoticed. Real politics and real government are relatively boring, but we've allowed it to become a reality show, a joke, and an insult to what the country means to me personally and many others. I don't buy into the theatrics and media hype, but I do listen to the words that are spoken. Words are powerful. And I said at the end, I sometimes wonder where we will be in 20 years, if we will have a country as strong as we have today. I suppose one could argue that we've already lost it, but I disagree. We've had many moments where leaders and people were more interested in their own personal issues or power than working for each other. We will get past this eventually and be stronger because of it. And really, it was just about the whole general consensus that we're on a ship lost at sea right now, and we're pushing each other off the sides of the boat. It's a fascinating time to observe. The old Zen saying, "May you live in interesting times," was actually a curse because we like consistency. And I got very fascinated by these kinds of. This is a book that I have called The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's by Manly P. Hall. And I flipped to a chapter because I wanted to bring in something else to talk about the idea of spells and how crucial this is and the point that I'm trying to make and how important it is to know this. Words have power. Words are like spells, and when people say things in the right way, the right phrases, it's just like chanting. It's just like a mantra. So, in other words, in many ancient religions and cultures, there would be a certain mantra or something that you would repeat over and over at a certain tone for a certain amount of time at a certain decibel level, right? The people would just, for thousands of years, people would experiment with these different chants. Only recently, things like chants and color therapy and things have been shown to actually change brainwaves, patterns of the people. They've shown people meditating can be an equivalent to a mystical experience or a religious experience. There's an actual, what they call the God center of the brain is the kind of rudimentary term for it. And it's where we have our spiritual experiences. It lights up, and they can see this in an MRI. So understanding this, we realize that we can make this light up with the right words, with the right actions. This means that not only for thousands of years have we've been working to improve, the knowledge of these certain frequencies or vibrations, which now is just all obscured because of all the nonsense on the internet of, all these different tones and frequencies that are supposed to do this, heal your cancer. I mean, there's no real. A lot of the historical knowledge behind these chants, spells, tones have been lost to time, like the Gregorian chants and the original tones, or the solfeggio as they call them, which people just look at the surface and they don't look deeper. And just like looking deeper with pseudoscience or some of these fake cures, people should be looking deeper with the words that are used against them, because people who want to hold on to power have always hired people whose sole job, and think about this, as human beings we're very intelligent. Mathematicians who spend their time on just math can do amazing equations. So imagine a whole group of people whose entire life is based on finding out the psychology of what you think, what you want, who you are, and how to get you to believe what a person tells you. It's not that hard. Even advertisers have been doing it. They've spent billions, probably trillions over the years, learning how people think. And now with AI and algorithms, which are, even though they're exponentially more powerful than humans and we don't even understand what they're really doing, they are finding patterns in our behavior. So we are easier to manipulate than ever before. And it's like our reliance on leadership, our reliance on big pharma, the idea that we need a pill for this and a pill for that. And do the drug commercials have anything to do with the fact that people are loaded up on pharmaceuticals? or that the United States of America, which has 5% of the world's population, consumes 80% of the world's opioids. That's a fact. 80% of the world's opioids consumed by 5% of the population. And if you want to get into talking about antipsychotics, antidepressants, anxiolytics, all these things to try to help fix us, it's all because of the spells that are cast over us. Because the power is within us to figure out what's right and what's wrong and what's true and what's not, to the extent that at least we can live our lives without being fooled all the time. But I guess that's the message that I'm really trying to share here, and that we need to, as individuals, always look deeper. Excuse me. I've found myself getting wrapped up in some of the bullshit in the past. Of course, I go through many different phases. It's like somebody said, like I was telling them, I said, I go through a kind of what you'd call, I guess, a spiritual reckoning or awareness, awakening, and then it'll fade for a while. And then it'll come back, and it'll come back. It takes time to process the things that you've learned. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's always like that. You can't rush headlong into, oh, I've discovered some great universal truth overnight. They don't last. Anything worth preserving takes time to build. And understanding how words are used against us when it's our main issue of, our main way of conveying information is through words. And so when words are chanted and people believe them, it's very difficult to sway them from that because it is so convincing. And that's, I guess, what I mean. But I'm going to move on from that. And I wanted to, because out of this book, there was this one page I was going to talk about chanting spells. It's the only one I really could find. But it began by talking about the hermetic theory of concerning the causation of disease. And what it was the 7 causes of disease, and then how to fix that problem, I guess. How to fix each particular issue. So I'm just going to read as much as I can here. It's fascinating. Excuse me. Okay. According to the Hermetic philosophers, there were 7 primary causes of disease. The first was evil spirits. These were regarded as creatures born of degenerate actions, subsisting on the vital energies of those whom they attached themselves. The second cause was derangement of the spiritual nature and the material nature. These two, failing to coordinate, produced mental and physical subnormality. The third was an unhealthy or abnormal mental attitude. And this goes back to the importance of mental alchemy. Changing lead to gold, finding positive and silver lining in any situation, right? It says, okay, sorry, I don't want to interrupt what it says. The third was an unhealthy or abnormal mental attitude. Melancholia, morbid emotions, excess of feeling, such as passions, lusts, greeds, and hates, affected the mumia, from which they reacted into the physical body, where they resulted in ulcers, tumors, cancers, fevers, and tuberculosis. And as much as this is ancient, some of their beliefs were kind of, delusional. They thought that A caused B, and it really didn't. They had a fallacious belief in many, causation doesn't mean, it's necessarily caused by something. It's just related, right? But it's true that we know now that stress does cause ulcers. It does cause many of these problems that we have, and the anxiety by our own thoughts and our own ability to control our reactions. Let's say we have a desire to consume excess, or to talk down on others, or whatever it might be, and we know in our hearts that it feels wrong. That kind of stuff gives you stress, it gives you ulcers, and it will, I don't know. It's only through experience we know that if we're living right, then we'll feel right, to an extent. It says, the ancients viewed the disease germ as a unit of mumia, which had been impregnated with the emanations from evil influences which it had contacted. In other words, germs were minute creatures born of man's evil thoughts and actions. Now, that might not be true. The viruses may not be born of our thoughts and emotions, but if we have negative thoughts and emotions all the time, aren't we more likely to have a lowered immune system, so we're more susceptible to get sick? And that's true as well. So, you can tie some of these, they may have had the wrong conclusions the right conclusions, but they have the wrong causes, right? It says the fourth cause of disease was what the Orientals called karma, that is, the law of compensation, which demanded that the individual pay in full for the indiscretion and delinquencies of the past, which means paying for what you've done in the past. Now, as far as if you extend that to a past life, that depends on what you believe. But the karma, I believe, is related to your situation in your own personal life. But also those around you. And since we are all one energy, I guess that gets into some weird territory. It says a physician had to be very careful how he interfered with the workings of this law, karma, lest he thwart the plan of eternal justice. The fifth cause was motion and aspects of the heavenly bodies. The stars did not compel the sickness, but rather impelled it. The hermetics taught that a strong and wise man ruled his stars, but that a negative, weak person was ruled by them. These 5 causes of disease are all superphysical in nature. They must be estimated by inductive and deductive reasoning and a careful consideration of the life and temperament of the patient. The 6th cause of disease was a misuse of faculty, organ, or function, such as overstraining a member or overtaxing the nerves. The 7th cause was the presence of the system of foreign substances, impurities, or abstractions. Under this heading, diet, air, sunlight, and the presence of foreign bodies, this doesn't include accidental injuries, which basically means don't do drugs, they're bad, okay? But that's for another time. So I'm going to just continue this last part. It says, according to the Hermetists, disease could be prevented or successfully combated in 7 ways. First, by spells and invocations. And now, like I said, spells are words, right? So you're not standing with a wand saying, "Oh, be gone, disease." It's the spell of saying, "I'm not sick," or "I will heal." It's the positive aspect of it. That's where the alchemy comes into it, right? It says, first, by spells and invocations, in which the physician ordered that the evil spirit causing the disease to depart from the patient. And honestly, this wouldn't be too far from faith healing. In fact, it would be quite identical to faith healing, which, if the patient and the person truly believe that they're healing, there's been a lot of studies to show that people can heal themselves through thinking about it. And that's a completely subject all its own. It's placebo and nocebo effect, right? With medicine, and the fact that our intentions mean so much. Same with the intentions behind the spells or the words that we use, right? This procedure was probably based on the biblical account of the man possessed by devils, whom Jesus healed by commanding the devils to leave the man and enter into a herd of swine. Sometimes the evil spirits entered a patient at the bidding of someone desiring to injure him. In these cases, the physician commanded the spirits to return to the one who sent them. It is recorded that in some instances, the evil spirits departed through the mouth in the form of clouds of smoke, sometimes from the nostrils as flames. It is even averted that the spirits might depart in the form of birds and insects. And I'm sure you've all seen those in the movies, you know. Bugs flying out of the noses. There's many different movies, you know, depicting that. And I think of it all as metaphor, of course. It's kind of like the old ghosts theory, like, everybody has a camera now, why aren't we catching these things? It's kind of like, where are all the new exorcisms? Where are, you know, these things are confusing to understand because we want to write it all off as we can understand it scientifically, and many things we can, but there's some aspects to this that are always difficult to really place. The second method of healing was by vibration. The inharmonies of the bodies were neutralized by chanting spells and intoning the sacred names, or by playing upon musical instruments and singing. Sometimes articles of various colors were exposed to the sight of the sick, for the ancients recognized, at least in part, the principle of color therapeutics, now in the process of rediscovery. The third method was the aid of talismans, charms, and amulets. The ancients believed that the planets controlled the functions of the human body, and that making charms out of certain different metals, they could combat the malignant influences of the various stars. Thus, a person who is anemic lacks iron. Iron was believed to be under the control of Mars. Therefore, in order to bring the influence of Mars to the sufferer, Around his neck was hung a talisman made of iron and bearing upon it a certain secret instruction, reputed to have the power of invoking the spirit of Mars. And it goes on and on. The fourth method was by the aid of herbs and simples. While they used metal talismans, the majority of the ancient physicians did not approve of mineral medicine in any form for internal use. Herbs were their favorite remedies. Like the metals, each herb was assigned to one of the planets. And, herbal healing is, what can I say? It's phenomenal in its own way. It has its own video. The fifth method of healing disease was by prayer. All ancient peoples believed in the compassionate intercession of the deity for alleviation of human suffering. Paracelsus said that the faith could cure all disease. Few persons, however, possess a sufficient degree of faith. The sixth method, by which prevention rather than cure, was relation of the diet and daily habits of life. And we all know we're our own worst enemy when it comes to how we feel. Diet and attitude and not getting enough sleep are, the first step. When people say, this is why I've always had issues recommending herbs to people. It'd be like, should I take this? Should I take this? And I'd say, the first thing you need to look at is diet. And, that goes for myself. Maybe I'm grumpy. Oh, shoot, I haven't eaten. I need to eat some food and eating properly, right? That's hard. It is. So anyway, the individual, by avoiding things which caused illness, remained well. The ancients believed that health was the normal state of man, and disease was the result of man's disregard of the dictates of nature. And quite often this turns out to be true as well. And the seventh method was practical medicine, consisting chiefly of bleeding, purging, and similar lines of treatment. These procedures, while useful in moderation, were dangerous in excess. Many a useful citizen has died at 25 or 50 years before his time as the result of drastic purging or having all the blood drained out of his body. Paracelsus used all seven methods of treatment, and even his worst enemies admitted that he accomplished results almost miraculous in character. Near his old estate in Hobenheim, the dew falls very heavy at certain seasons of the year, and Paracelsus discovered that by gathering the dew under certain configurations of the planets, he obtained a water possessing marvelous medicinal virtue, for it had absorbed the properties of the heavenly bodies. Okay, that's a weird one, but we'll talk about that. And then it goes on to talk about herbs and herbology. Now, most of you know I love herbs. I'm a big fan of herbs. I mean, not just because of kratom, of course. Like, I've been into herbs long before that. That's how I found it. I have so many different types of herbs that, and I'm very cautious about what I take. I don't just throw a bunch of crap in a pill. And there have been times where I've experimented with all different types, but herbs can be very useful. Eating properly can be very useful. Living right. Getting exercise is a huge one, right? Something I need to get more lately. And on top of all these things that we can do to better our lives, we're still stuck in the full circle here, back to the spells and the main point I started out with. And not just the spells of our own making, and not just the people, not just the talking heads, okay? I'm not just talking about politicians out there trying to get your attention. We have a choice how much we expose ourselves to bullshit, including politics. Now, every 4 years there's a new election, for example, in this country, and I pay attention to what's going on, but I don't sit and dwell on it. I look at the headlines once a day lately, and I'm good, right? Most of the time that I spend doing anything online is, let's say, talking with my subscribers or on my videos. And then let's say I get involved in an argument. What's the point? What's the point in arguing with somebody? What's the point in taking the energy to argue a point when there's no solution? And then it's kind of like we have to weigh the options of how much energy we want to spend and how much we are under the spell of other people and of ourselves. Because it's easy for people, it's kind of like just the guy playing the flute, the snake charmer, the snake coming out. It's how a lot of people are when they're throwing things towards you. Not just trolls or somebody who, not just in even arguments, but even really good, valid discussions that make you think. But they make you think about things that maybe just aren't worth the time to think about. In other words, how much do you need to know about the world? And if we focus on every little negative thing that's going on around the world and we're consistently immersed in it, then we are under the spell. And therefore, we're not living healthy. And therefore, we are more likely to get sick. And here's one of the great ironies. If you're worried about getting sick, you're more likely to get sick. Or, I don't know how else to put it. I mean, that's you worry yourself and your immune system breaks down. We can't live our lives without emotion, and we can't live our lives immersed in fear or in happiness all the time or anger. Because having, I guess, emotional maturity and balance is something that we should all strive towards, but can be very difficult at times. Right now, what's going on in the world can be very stressful for a lot of people. And I think that's why it's all the more important to look within and to do a little more critical research, not into politics, not into religion, not into the negatives or anything else, but into ourselves, into our own hearts, and really ask ourselves what we want, who we are, and not to fall under the spell of the media, the spell of politicians, the spell of charlatans trying to steal things from you, trying to take your hard-earned money by selling you a product that they know doesn't do anything, selling you on hopes. It's one of the most, I think that's one of the worst things, the most frustrating aspects to me is the people who willingly sell things like that $8,000 flashlight thing that I posted something about it the other day. It's supposed to cure you from this or that. And I thought, the only kind of people who will buy this are people who can obviously afford it, but there are people who will have their life savings turned over for a spiritual awakening or awareness. And that's the most important takeaway here, is that it's all within all of us. You don't have to get on your knees and beg to any god to find a spiritual awakening or your own truth. You don't have to follow any other man's religion. My personal recommendation would be to look into everything. Read all different books, Bibles, and as much as you can, anyway. Do the critical research, but don't fall into somebody else's spell, because it's painful when you're arguing a point that really doesn't matter, like which God is real, or something that in 5 years won't matter at all. It's not worth the energy. We have to be, if we want to live healthy, we have to think healthy. And so, I don't know. I'm rambling at this point. I wanted to make a couple more points, but I'll save them for the future. Thanks for listening, and I hope you gained something from this, and if not, sorry, bummer. I did. It's like revisiting these ideas, to reminding myself not to be under spells. I'll talk to you later.